So for every Okada ride you think of taking today, think of going with Max, right? Because you can now understand that you're putting food on somebody's table, you're putting food on their family's table, and also you're helping prevent lives and accidents, all right? So let me go to this side and look at how do you think about impact?
Yeah, I'll just focus in on one example, and that's around gender. We've been doing, incorporating gender into our impact since we began, but really much more intentionally about a decade ago. And our philosophy in looking at the impact of gender within our investments is to have it be across all our investments. So we're not taking a subset and saying these are our gender investments. We're saying every investment impacts gender, and it does. And the reality is some impacts it really strongly, some weakly. And we take all of that into our portfolio, and we understand where they are in accounting for their gender impact, leveraging gender as a business opportunity, uncovering markets that they might not see fully when they do that can add revenue to their business. We see where they are when we first make their investment, and then we track it over time and see then the change in how they're incorporating, tracking, and incorporating gender into their business over time. And it's that over time piece is where we feel like there's a lot of impact. And so just to really emphasize, we're not looking for the perfect gender investment day one. That's not it. We're looking to work with groups, share what we've seen as best practices across their peer group, perhaps in another country, perhaps on another continent, and incorporate and share that knowledge so they can consider that in their own business and then increase over time their impact positively within gender.
Okay, great, thank you. And Alice?
So I think there's two ways you can look at impact, and the first, there's just a general impact that has been mentioned already. There's gender impact, there's access to finance. There's also, you can look at impact in terms of blended finance, because those are two aspects that are linked to each other, but are kind of different in how you measure it. And that's why the measurement is actually an important discussion to have, because there's no really harmonized way of measuring impact, especially when it comes to blended finance. There is international measures that are in place, driven by the global DFIs, but actually they're not so much that are driven by the continent or the African economies themselves. So, and that also creates an issue, because there is no, you will see there tend to be no alignment between the product that is available and actually what does the demand need, because it's a supply-demand driven approach. So there is some work that has to be done in order to make sure that there is an alignment between what Nigerian economy or whatever sectors you're investing in the country is also aligned with what supply comes inside. So in terms of measuring impact as part of the SDGs, there is things, one of them is access to energy or clean energy. And I'll use one example in particular, which is a wind farm in Olayinka. And the way we measured the impact on that particular project was first on a clean energy basis. The country was very heavy and still to a certain extent energy fuel driven. And by investing in a wind farm in 4 islands out of the 12 islands, we were able to reduce about 10 million in a year in amount spent on fuel to generate energy. Now the wind farm provides about 23% of the available energy in the country. We created about 250 direct jobs under the project. And also, we actually managed to reduce the COD generated about 10 ton million since the creation of the project. So in terms of impact, you can look at that. Now, in terms of blended finance, I think we are not good. We tend to use the general impact measurement of job creation, access to finance. But if you want to attract it, you need to also be able to measure it and say, okay, if there was no concession funding on this project, what would happen? How many projects have managed to come up because of blended finance, and which type of product under blended finance? Is it grants? Is it concession funding? Is it equity, or is it debt?
Very much. So from what I'm hearing, I think that, thank you for bringing up the gender issue, because it was actually going to be my next question in terms of how do we disaggregate this by gender. So Guy, just before but I think what Alice has said is also mindful that we need to be deliberate about this thing. It's a source of an opportunity, but we need to be deliberate about it. We need to understand how we take the data, how we use it, but most of all, know your business. Know it almost like the back of your hand, or when they wake you up in the middle of the night and say, what's your business pitch? And you can give it in that way. You understand your markets, because they're going to work with you, but they're not going to help you build it. They're not going to help you run it. And the whole idea is that it's a progressive process, and to get that impact that we want to reach the SDGs by 2030, it's about how do we ensure that we can stay in business and be sustainable going forward. So finally, how many female Okada riders do we have?
That's a great question. I wanted to react to Jennifer's point, because I thought it's fantastic. So we a bit of an anecdote, right? We had a meeting with with a bank recently. And I went with Tayo Chindu, myself, the two co-founders and myself, on the executive team, 3 guys. So we walk into the meeting, and there's a woman leading the meeting, and the first question she asks us is, "Oh, clearly you guys are not a gender-neutral organization." And we laughed. We say, "Oh, well, I mean, if you think about, in reality, we kind of are, because our management team below executive level is actually dominated by women." Or there's a higher proportion of women than men. The way we always looked at it, and our thinking has sort of evolved very recently, right? As men, because let's be fair, right? We you cannot address gender parity in a room full of men. Let's just be honest. So as men, the way we always thought about it is we don't listen to it, and we actually don't. It's not like we don't run an interview and think, oh, we must hire women for this role. No, we're looking to fill a role, and we're looking to hire the best candidate, whether it's a man, whether it's a woman. But that's not enough, right? So over the recent past, our thinking has evolved, through, again, going back to the point around engagement, through engagement with, financiers, whether it's, blended finance investors, whether it's commercial, more commercial-oriented investors. Through engagement, we realize that is not enough, because the two populations, face, different sets of problems, right? That it's, very hard to relate to if you aren't cognizant of those. So, for example, forget even full-time staff. When it comes to drivers, in your instance, so in Lagos, it's extremely dangerous, right, for a woman to be an Okada rider. Right, because of the hours that they work, right? Because it's a very sort of like lonely profession, and she can be easily exposed to, her safety can be put at risk, right? But there's another way you can look at it, right? For a lot of women too, it's very hard for them to move around. Because when they have to maybe leave work, late at night. There isn't available transport, right? So how do you sort of like develop a mobility offering that is safe and affordable for women, right? That's one way you can also sort of like address, gender equality. Recently, we had a conversation with one of our partners, with one of our, motorcycle manufacturing partners. And he made us aware of a specific program in Kano, right, for targeted at women, right? Why that program could be targeted at women is because in Kano, the primary means of transportation is not Okada, it's tricycles. So it's safer for women to drive a tricycle, right, than to drive an Okada, right? So now it's something that we're thinking about. Okay, how do we build a product offering, an asset finance offering, right, targeted at that type of sort of like mobility, that type of vehicle, and particularly for women. So it comes down to, not to sound like a broken record, but it comes down again to really engaging at all levels, right? Engaging with your various stakeholders, engaging with your business partners, right? Engaging with your customers, engaging with your users. They're different, right? Users and customers are different. Engaging with your investors, with your prospective investors, existing investors, so on and so forth, for many different reasons. No one has the monopoly of knowledge and of ideas, right? So by not engaging as widely as possible, you're basically leaving options off the table. That's the best way I can put it, right? And you don't know. There's a famous phrase by Rumsfeld, right? Unknown. You don't know what you don't know. So engaging enables you to know, at least to know the things you don't know, right? And then eventually get to solve those areas.
In your portfolio, Kola, how many women, and are there any additional constraints to women accessing finance?
Really good question. Well, I'd say we've got about 30% of our portfolio that's women-led on the founder level. One of my most proudest moments was recently, Quartz released their Innovators of the Year listing, and we had 2 portfolio companies on that list, both founded by women, Piggy Bank and Lisa Frick. Both founded by women. And so I think this is something that we continue to try to advocate for. In Kaduna State, for instance, with the support of the Rockefeller Foundation and the World Bank, we're doing a women-only program for digital entrepreneurship. And what we're finding with that program is it's actually empowering more women to be inspired and to, especially because of the religious and cultural factors in that part of the country. And so it's something that we continue to advocate with our foundation and working with shining lights in the industry like Odun of Piggy Bank to get more women founders out building startup companies.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to the panelists. So we'll take questions now before I have them have their closing remarks. So let's start over there. The gentleman over there was the first to put his hand up, and then the lady here. And thank you to the organizers, actually. I think this is one of the events I've been to that really has gender equity in their speakers and moderation panel. Seriously, the last moderator was a lady as well, and we have ladies on the panel, and same thing here. So we don't want manels. Yeah. You know, there's a foundation I know of, actually. None of their staff are allowed to go and speak on a panel if it's just a manel. And they're very deliberate about it. Yes, it's a manual. Okay, so great. Let's start with the questions.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. My name is Daria Sobele. I'm the founder of Executives Helping Initiative and ASADS. ASADS means Anti-Suicide and Depression Squad. So my question is, what does blending finance have to do with mental health? You were talking about statistics. And as of 2016, the stat says about 360 million people are suffering depression, 60 million Nigerians. That was 2016. The stat has risen. The only time we hear about suicide is when we see it on the news. And another important thing is our government in Nigeria doesn't cater for mental health. Like, there's nothing done about it. So, and also, what's the chance or an opportunity for like a startup like me to be able to get in that space whereby we can actually do something about it?
Okay, thank you, Dari.
All right.
Next question, the lady over here.
Thank you all so much for such an excellent presentation. I learned quite a lot. Okay, so I honestly worry. My name is Chidi Coldsweat, and I'm the founder of Donors for Africa Foundation. And I honestly worry that there's a huge disconnect between impact on the field, direct impact in the lives of people who earn less than, or who live on less than $1 a day, and then this beautiful conversation we're having around blended financing and tracking impact, especially at that level. So I know there are different levels of impact, but most importantly, if you're working around the SDGs, and a lot of non-profit organizations, we work directly around the SDGs. We are on the field, we have the numbers, we work directly with those people, we understand the issues, we can tell you what regions, what areas, who to be talking to. Is it possible is it possible for these funding organizations at that level to work directly with the non-profits rather than putting all this money and all that effort? Because with minimal amount of income or resources, we get the result on the field. We make the impact. We affect the life of that woman directly. Is it possible for these organizations to have conversations with the non-profits on the field? Let us handle impact, fund impact investment at the grassroots level. Let us get you the numbers. Let us get you the answers to the question you're searching for. We struggle with money. You struggle with results. Can we get married already? Like, do you understand?
Okay, great. Thank you, Judy. There was another one over here. Somewhere on this side, yes. We want to take about 5 or so we'll come to you. And then at the back, yes, I can see you. Okay, yes, the gentleman there. Go ahead.
Hello.
So we'll take 6.
My name is Aziz Hussein, and I'm the founder of PayChange. My question to the panel is that we've identified that there's a very huge education gap. We're looking at highest number of out-of-school kids. Like, these are the children, these are the future. Like, and the impact we're talking about, if we're talking about the future, then we have to factor the children into this equation. And my own question is that what are you guys doing to really touch down? Because 10 million, 20 million out of school children, this is not a joke. Like, we really need to consider these facts and work on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Aziz. The gentleman in the pink shirt, and then we'll go right to the back in the striped shirt, black and white striped shirt, yes.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kola Alabi, CEO of Sun Global Services Limited. I have not really a question, but an advice for Max. Because
can we
it's
take that offline?
Inclusion, yes.
Can we do offline?
No. It's general, so that everybody can learn from it.
Okay.
It's, you ask a question about women inclusion. How many women riders do we have? So it needs to be, we need to understand that the better we close the gap between what men are doing and what women should do, the better for the society. Because if the gaps is getting wider, it's putting a lot of pressure on the society. Okay. I worked in Shell before I founded Sun Global Service Limited. Shell has a transport pool. So, when you, from anywhere, you can just call for a driver, and then they will come. Then when Shell introduced female driving vehicles, it was a surprise to all of us. But do you know what? They were better to ride with. Okay? And it was a lesson for all of us. So eventually you find out that people like calling on the ladies. They just deliberately, you don't have any choice of who they would send to you, but deliberately they just want to, to send a female to them. So what Shell did was to take them through some rigorous training. What you need to do is just to think about it, just as she said. Give it some thoughts and see how you can take them through some training, and then they will be there. All those risks that you think are high risk, they are not as high as you think.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So they should work at mitigating the risks. Yes. The gentleman at the back with the black and white shirt, striped shirt.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mbako Bina, and I work with Santiago Rock. My question is this. I'm in the manufacturing industry, and we recycle waste material to finished good, and we sell it back to the market. But one of the biggest challenges we in the manufacturing industry face is that people are not quick to come to our aid because of the long-term return on investment. And we've tried reaching out to lots of banks and lots of financial institutions, and we've written lots of grants, application to many foundations and all that, and they keep pushing us the best of luck in our future endeavors. My question is, the truth of the matter is China is booming right now. Singapore, Hong Kong, most of the Asian countries are booming right now because of the growth in SME, especially in the manufacturing sector. This sector is seriously neglected in Nigeria, and we want to know what we have the statistics, we have the knowledge, we know everything, but we've not gotten the push to take us to the next level. So I want to know what IIF, Calvert, Capital, and all that is really doing to help those in the manufacturing industry to blend this finance and all that to take us to the next level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mbakwe. And our last question, please.
Okay, thanks. My name is Innocent Chukwu. My question is directed to you, Guy. Is how do you measure the sustainability of the jobs you create in the Okada riders market against the activities of rogue regulators or rapacious regulators? While you're trying to grow your business, you're operating in an environment where the policies of government across the federation is actually to drive out Okada riders. So we create the jobs today. What about tomorrow when they phase out the use of motorbikes?
Okay, thank you very much, Innocent. So great question. So let me start with Jennifer. So Jennifer, I think Mbakwe was asking about what is your portfolio approach for manufacturing businesses in this market, for example?
Yeah, so a nuanced answer perhaps, because it depends. You know, manufacturing is a big word. There's a lot of businesses that fall under that title of manufacturing. There can be smaller businesses, there can be larger businesses. And so a lot of it comes back to what Guy was saying and just how ready the business is for financing. That determines a lot of our portfolio in manufacturing. You know, businesses, as they grow and scale, move through a capital continuum. They start with friends and family money, they move into equity, maybe mezzanine finance, debt finance to scale, and then potentially connect to other capital sources. You know, get bought by a corporate, maybe they connect to a bank. Where we really play strongly is in scaling businesses. So we have debt capital, and we often provide loans that are an average $4 million US. We go as low as $1 million US, but we're really looking to scale a business. So I think this is part of what we've been talking about is as you are building your business, knowing what type of capital different people have and what's appropriate for your business at that moment in time is going to create a better conversation when you find the right people than just kind of throwing your cards out across the table. Is really know what capital you need, who has that type of capital, and find the right partner at that time.
I think the word I would use for you, Mbakwe, if nobody else wants to chime in, is really engage, get the right information, and start to engage now. I think the next question is also for you from Dari in terms of what do we do with mental health?
So that one I was thinking about, and you know, the first thing that came to mind are social impact bonds. And I very naively don't know how deep that conversation has moved into this market specifically. I see it starting to come across the African continent. But in general, what that tool, one of the tools in the toolkit of blended finance, is striving to do is demonstrate to public or perhaps private resources that there's new and different interventions. And if you can demonstrate that new and different interventions can lead to different outcomes, then people will copy that. And then we can create new outcomes based on different solutions. And you know, mental health is one area in some markets where we're learning more and more about solutions to that disease. And now it's really changing our practice and engagement with mental health that can create different outcomes. So whether that's creating more beds and safe spaces for people that need it at certain times, whether that's creating more subsidy to visit mental health practitioners, that might be different than what we do now, which is resort to locking people up. So it's really about how can finance influence how we create solutions or interventions, and then demonstrate outcomes, and perhaps then create scale around outcomes that are creating better results.
And I'll ask Kola to chime in here as well, since what do you see from what you're doing currently?
Yeah, sure. The mental health question is one that I'm personally really interested in. A couple weeks ago, I spent some time talking to the founder of Mentally Aware, and I think the real issue is if you look at blended finance, one of the characteristics that qualifies transactions for this mechanism is a return, a financial return, and so that's probably where the trick is for these types of enterprises. How do you design and deliver your intervention with some financial return? Unfortunately, in this market, the government isn't doing anything. But the trend is actually upwards, and so I think there is need for creative solutions like either the bonds that you refer to, or other providers of capital to come into the space. It's a growing trend, and we have to get creative about it.
Thank you very much. And I think the same goes for education in terms of the question as is asked, that it's really about having the right solutions, creative solutions, and how do we bring them for package in a way that can be financed and banked in general. So I'll go to the question from Chidi, which is how do we begin to remove some of the layers that we have between those intervention agencies that are directly on the field and the various numerous structures that we have in place? And I'm not sure who wants to take a stab at that.
I'll just say, unfortunately, right now, we need those layers. Because capital to move into communities, it needs a pathway. It needs someone to carry that capital. And so there's middlemen. And until we build up those financing institutions, we need a few layers to move the capital responsibly. So just very bluntly in our model, all our money is raised in the US and I live in Washington, DC. I can't invest directly in Guy's business likely, although I would love to. But there could be, But if there was even Lagos, and like there is one of our borrowers in the room, Grofine, who specializes in lending to small and medium enterprises that we do invest in, they can then on-lend to the business in Lagos, who they can provide the technical assistance to, they can provide the financing to, they can work with the NGO in place to have that community voice informing their investment, and then kind of the money moves back up the chain. And so, to move the money responsibly, we need some of these intermediaries right now. As things scale, we have seen in some markets that the business, and it's in microfinance, a good example, gets large enough they can go directly to the capital markets. They have enough track record, enough financial performance that they can go straight to money. But right now, as a business is building, we tend to need those intermediaries.
Do you want to chime in?
Yes, and the way I would put it is in some of the markets, especially like in East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda, what has been put in place to try to get what Chidi was mentioning is the kind of financing that's a performance-based financing. So, for example, if you're a donor or you're philanthropic, instead of providing upfront cash to the government or to maybe a bigger financial institution, you require them, okay, you go, you perform this key milestone, you get the results, as you mentioned, that a bigger institution like will be looking for, and once you achieve those milestones, then we provide you financing. So that pushes the local financial counterpart to actually come at the grassroots level and engage people like you to be able actually to achieve the result that larger financial institutions like ours will be looking for. And to push for that kind of performance-based financing is really up to the government, because at the end of the day, you cannot do anything in a country without the involvement or the approval of the government. So for example, the government can identify key sectors, the health sector, the education sector, and say, okay, in this kind of social-based sectors, I want to see quick impact, then this is how I'm going to allow the investment in the country or coming in the country to be channeled in that direction. I want a performance-based financing. And that you tend to see some sort of positive shift in terms of how the financial institution engage grassroots level NGOs like yours.
Okay, thank you. And I think the final question is really about the big elephant in the room, which is government and policy and regulation and their role in whatever we do. And I think Innocent asked a direct question in terms of Lagos State government regarding the Okada riders, but I think it resonates across all the questions in terms of how do we really create an enabling environment and an economy that is politically stable, that allows people like Jen to bring their money into a country like Nigeria. So I'll start with Max, and I'll just have the other panelists use that to close in terms of, yes, we had the government representatives here, but how do we further engage them to ensure that we can actually work collaboratively with private sector to close our SDG gaps?
Okay, so the first part of the question was sustainable jobs, right? I remember that part. All right. So let me start with engagement again. I'll sound like a broken record. We figured out, fairly early in our early stage in our life cycle that we cannot be successful in what we do without working hand in hand with the regulators and government, right? So very early we started engaging with them at various levels, right? At very, very senior level, at the executive office level, at the very operational level, at sort of like police station level, DPO level, and so on and so forth. Last mile. With various government bodies and agencies, such as LSCTF, for instance. Teju, that was here earlier, mentioned the work that we've done together. They have been very, very supportive and instrumental in basically getting us where we are today. They were one of the few people, right, to effectively not laugh us out the room when we say we want to finance Okada people, right? They gave us, some funding a couple of years ago to help us demonstrate the viability of the model, right? So I think it's very important to sort of clarify or bring more sort of truth into the conversation, right? So there's conversation from the outside looking in and what appears to be a very hostile environment. And that's not to say that things are perfect. They are far from perfect. But at least in Lagos, and even across the country, because we've engaged in different states. From the little that I understand, and I'm not a governor. I have no intention of being one someday. So I don't know. But from the little I understand, they care about a few things. So the governments, they have a few. They need to deliver on a few outcomes, right? They need to deliver on on development, on job creation, on safety, on security, generally, right? And so to the extent that you can demonstrate to them that you are part of the solution rather than the problem, what we've seen typically is that they are likely to be supportive, right? So LST have been very supportive. We've engaged from a regulatory and sort of like policy making standpoint with different classes of policy makers. And from you can see in the news over the past few months, the policy environment around mobility and transportation has significantly evolved in Lagos, right? And even in other states. We're in Akure, for instance. In Akure, it's a much more enabling environment. We're seeing what is being done in Oyo State, for instance, right? We have sometimes even governors' offices across the country calling us, approaching us, saying, "Oh, we heard what you've done in Lagos. We heard what you've done in Ondo State. Please come. We want to talk to you. We want to see whether we can deploy something similar in our state." So the reality is a bit different from the narrative, right? That's to answer the question directly. I forgot what was the other part of the question. Okay, so I can speak. I can speak to my or to our own example, And again, to the point around sustainability of the employment, aside from regulation. So because in our specific instance, because we sort of like unlock financing for the drivers and help them access asset finance funding so they can acquire their bikes, effectively, look, if you provide a lease or a loan or a financing to someone over a 12 months period, you know, and you've built the type of infrastructure that enables you to, you know, sort of like do the risks, the preliminary risk analysis, so you onboard the right kind of drivers, because that's as important. And typically, you have a person that will stay in that form of employment for at least 12 months, right? Because they want to repay their loan. People typically want to repay their loan. Let's also fix that narrative. People want to repay their loan. They want to make money. They want to feed their families, right? So as long as they tie sort of like their livelihood, their social advancement to the activity they're having, they're no different, you know, like they're no different from you and I in this room, right? They are committed to being successful, right? Which makes the job sustainable. And also, if you've built a value proposition that enables them to, you know, generate an income, as I mentioned earlier, right, which is significantly higher than what they would generate otherwise, that's another very sticky and compelling value proposition, which makes it sustainable.
Thank you, Kola. Guy, Kola.
Sure. So why we will just like to deploy capital and support our companies, we find that engaging with the policymakers is really critical to the success of the companies we support. And so we host policy dialogues. We ensure we stay close to the various regulators, the CBN, the SEC, and we prefer to see them as partners as opposed to something else. But I think there's also a role that market-creating innovators like Max play in influencing institutions and policy in the long term. And I think there's a chapter in the Prosperity Paradox, the new book, that really hones in on the topic quite well, that I strongly recommend everyone here to study, which really speaks to the power of companies as they scale to influence the policy landscape for the betterment of everyone else. And I think that's something that we must all hope plays out in our market.
Okay, great, thank you. Jen?
I'll just briefly say we look for alignment. So to know, even if the government isn't in the transaction or the public, you know, is not in the transaction, they're part of the enabling environment. So echoing some of your comments, we look for alignment, and if it's not there, that's a challenge. On the other side, we're always happy to be helpful in showing other examples, demonstrating what might be happening outside of a country that can inspire and create learning opportunities.
Great. Alice? And I think finally, because you're the big ticket item, and I think sometimes we ask for sovereign guarantees in these structures.
And I hope actually, as time goes, we do not, because actually it's heavy on the government, and especially our African government. I think it's more, even as an investor, a financial institution, if you're really looking for sustainability, if there's no local ownership in what you're trying to do, you're not going to achieve anything. You'll come, put as much as money as you want. You may see some result in the next 1, 2, 3 years, but 10 years down the road, you come back and nothing would have been done. So even if obviously government change, policies change, interest in the government change, but at least when you engage the local communities where you're putting your money, you ensure sustainability, because if the community own what you're doing for them, then it's sustainable because they feel invested inside.
Thank you all very much, and you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you very much. And I think that in all, approaches that work are diverse, and it's really about putting the right pieces together and sort of building that puzzle. But certain things I think we should take to mind is that we operate within an ecosystem, and we need to engage with all parties within that ecosystem, not just thinking about, oh, I have a good idea, I'm doing this kind of product, there's a problem in the market, there's mental health, there's education gaps. But again, understand it from that perspective. It's a business, and have the right resources to be able to engage. Because I don't know if you noticed when Guy and Kola were talking about policy dialogues, talking to different state governments, engaging at different levels, it takes resources and capacity that you might not have. So have a strategy as to how you're going to put that together, like data. Those are things that you need to build on ground and have access to. Understand your business and understand your business model. And I think what the suppliers are saying is that when you do all these things, it makes the transaction process easier. I think Jen said you might do 5 or 6 engagements, but sometimes you might have to do 60 engagements, but you must be able to put the legwork in and get it working. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, have a good afternoon. Thank you.